in a Bandung prison where I'm sure his life is extremely comfortable.
Yeah.
So it's not easy, but like Gandhi said, orang menjadi bijak tidak karena kebijakan, tapi karena keharusan. Yeah? And one day you're going to be in a situation where there is a keharusan. You experience that between 45 and 49. Ada keharusan, ya? Harus mengorbankan jiwa dan raga dan juga harus mengorbankan keenakan dari hidup demi salah satu untuk melestarikan, untuk mempertahankan, untuk mengorbitkan republik. Ya.
Jadi untuk ke depan ini Indonesia, kalau menurut Pak Peter, apa yang di luar soal korupsi itu, apa yang dihadapi oleh Indonesia yang urgent?
Well, what is urgent is that you're living in the middle of a new Cold War between America and China. From Korea to Japan to Taiwan to the Philippines, there is a circle of states which are in fact allies of the United States in order to contain China. Yeah? China is a regional and soon to be, already is, a global superpower. Yeah? If I'm a businessman here, I know what is going to happen. I tender for a new building, and the Chinese will come to me and say, what is your lowest tender? And I will say, well, it's X from Jarum. We'll go 10% lower than that. Yeah? And we'll bring in all our workers. Bedo desa dari Fujian, they come here. Schools, hospitals we set up for them. And when the project is over, like the bullet train to Bandung, Bedo desa kembali ke Tiongkok. Yeah? So you're going to menghadapi salah satu situasi yang sangat kurang nyaman. Yeah? Who are you going to side with? You're going to side with the Americans? Or you're going to side with the Chinese, or you're going to try and be neutral. Yeah? And if you're going to try and be neutral, you have to be powerful. You have to be able to defend yourself. You have to be like Switzerland. You have to be like Singapore. Singapore has the most powerful navy, army, and air force, even though it's just 2.8 million citizens. 4.5 million people live, but there are only 2.8 million citizens. You have to be like that. You have to basically self-strengthen. You have to go through a Meiji restoration in order to be able to not be a victim of the new Cold War. You don't want to be like the Philippines, the battering ram on Little Thomas Reef or whatever. You have to be G2. You have to be able to navigate between the rock and a hard place of the Chinese and the Americans. And that is going to dictate your world. How successfully you're going to be able to do that. Because mau tidak mau, China is going to be an increasingly prominent influence. It's going to be an influence culturally, it's going to be an influence financially. Belt and Road, that's $1 trillion they're spending on the Belt and Road initiative. So you have to think, is this investment really necessary? And if it is coming from the Chinese, what are the strings attached? Look at Laos. I mean, they've built this wonderful railway in Laos. But it's more than the whole state budget. So Laos, going forward, is a satellite of China. They have so many credits over Vientiane or Luang Prabang that Laos is not an independent nation anymore. And you have to use your kecerdasan. You have to prioritize what is necessary. What is necessary to have a successful... If 2.8 million people can do it in Singapore, then 208, you're 100 times bigger than Singapore. Think of all the talents you've got here. I mean, from Texas with the Batak to, you know, people in New England with the Javanese. I mean, you've got a whole gamut of skills. You've got people who are brilliant. You need to realize that brilliance. but you're not going to do it in a feudal republic. But then, if the Chinese are going to go and stay abroad, or if they're Indonesians, they're also probably going to go and stay abroad. How many people do you have in the diaspora who are not coming back here? Not because they don't love Indonesia, because they know that if they come back here, there are no laboratories for them, that there are no places that they can push forward their research and dihargai, and that research is honored. Here I am, dengan jeripaya, dengan Vardiman, di ambang pintu internasional, kita mendorong Baba Diponegoro untuk diakui sebagai memory of the world. If that was Japan and that was the tale of Genji, there would be trillions, there would be millions of dollars to put this in the public domain. There would be films, Layar Lebar, based on the tale of Genji. There would be a Netflix, 6-part Netflix series. And you could buy the Baba Diponegoro in a popular edition, you could buy it in a scholarly edition, you could buy it in a middlebrow edition. Yeah? Lots and lots of different editions. And that would be part of your warp and woof. You may not like him, but he's part of your warp and woof of your history. Yeah? What has happened? Nothing. Nothing has happened. Even the pittance to put this into the public domain. Out of my own pocket, I paid for it to be translated into Indonesian. But the next step is to put it in the public domain, and that means a scholarly edition. And from that scholarly edition, a landasan of all sorts of popular editions can follow. And then it enters the bloodstream. And then enters the bloodstream, and then you have a footprint, a soft power footprint for the world. Ila Gallego. Why does it have to be an American like Robert Wilson to bring it to the stage? Why isn't this brought to the stage by Indonesians in Singapore, in Madison Square Gardens? Yeah? Ila Gallego, 5,000 folio pages, the largest manuscript in the world. The creation myth of the Bugis. And it's been recognized as a memory of the world. But do we know about it? Well, no. That has to change. You have to get rid of this inferiority complex, this colonial inferiority complex. And you have to empower yourself culturally, financially, militarily, and diplomatically, so that you can actually hold your own in a treacherous world.
Yeah. Inferiority complex, colonial. Okay. Jadi mungkin yang terakhir barangkali Pak Peter ya. Tadi kembali ke soal korupsi itu. Sebenarnya apa sih yang membuat Bapak tertarik selain untuk mengupas demikian dalam soal-soal Pangeran Diponegoro itu dan kembali ke soal korupsi itu dan mengkomparasinya dengan negara yang memang sudah jauh dan Danuningrat.
This is Diponegoro taking off his shoe and slapping the putty over the face because he was corrupt. In the face of...
Nah, itu istilah korupsi sendiri juga nggak anakronis ya Pak Peter ya. Artinya waktu dulu mungkin dinamakan bukan korupsi tapi upeti atau ungguh atau apalah gitu. Tapi kemudian ketika datang Belanda atau VOC itu kemudian istilah-istilah seperti korupsi itu yang dipakai bukan lagi soal upeti atau soal ungguh atau soal yang lain gitu. Gimana ya Pak?
Ya memang segelintir orang Belanda di sini dengan VOC dan mereka harus meraih untung untuk profits untuk shareholders di Belanda dan mereka harus ada sistem yang menguntungkan pegawai mereka sendiri. Jadi contoh dari VOC tidak contoh yang betul-betul indah bagi orang pribumi di Indonesia. Dan contoh dari VOC juga sangat rentan perubahan dalam situasi dunia. The Dutch lost the fourth Anglo-Dutch Sea War in the 1780s. Dan dengan ditaklukkan oleh Inggris secara mutlak di pertempuran di Fourth Anglo-Dutch Wars, Dan juga begitu banyak hutang sebab Belanda menolong Amerika untuk meraih merdeka. Mereka runtuh. But you have figures like Joko Tingkir, or you have figures like Erlangga, you have figures like Diponegoro, who are not tidak menurut arus. Yeah, they're brought up. Joko Tingkir, the wife of a dalang, Erlangga, 16 years in the forest, Diponegoro under the aegis of a very formidable great-grandmother, and dibentuk sebagai seorang leader yang sebenarnya punya internalized values. So even if you offered him a principality, he wouldn't take it, because that's not the Dharma. Yeah. So maybe you have to look into the history and and what Diponegoro is fighting about is also, I mean, his mind is not colonized. Dia tidak punya otak yang dekolonisasi. Dia punya otak yang pre-colonization. Yeah? So he's able to tell the Dutch, you Dutch are so suspicious about your doctors. Don't you know that every day we have bodies thrown into the sea from this warship? Yes. Because they die of scurvy and of diseases, which are completely preventable. We Javanese, Jammu, and we have our own system of healthcare. We're not going to die of scurvy. Even just chewing cereal will give you enough vitamin C for the day. Yeah? Jadi ada pengetahuan yang kita punya yang tidak harus tunggu orang dari luar untuk mengajarkan kepada kita. Everything is there. It's a bit like what the Buddha said. Everybody is a Buddha to be. Yeah? With this particular culture, you've got to menggalikan, expose what are your assets, cultural assets, not just physical assets, mental assets, cultural assets. And for me, that's why Diponegoro is interesting, because there's no cringe mentality towards the West. The West is a very recent invention. It's only lasted for 200 years. 200 years ago, there was no American warship in Indonesian waters. The first warship was the USS Potomac, which bombarded Kuala Batu because of a perselisihan dengan perdagangan merica. You have to think, 200 years hence, is there going to be an America? Or do they have a second civil war and they break up? Yeah? Where are we going to be? You need to think 50-year plans. If you look at Korea, you look at Singapore, you look at Taiwan, you look at Japan, they're not just 5-year administrations. They're looking to see, where do we want to be in 50 years' time? Where do you want to be 100 years after independence? What sort of country do you want to achieve? And the power of the mind is such that you could achieve, if you really put your mind to it, you could achieve that. And you're ruthless enough. I mean, this person cut off all the heads of the Lura between Sentolo and Kulon Progo because they cooperated with the Dutch, and he put them on pikes.
Dalam buku itu Pak Peter juga ngangkat atau apalah istilahnya soal pemerintahan atau negara modern itu sebenarnya diawali oleh Daendels.
Well, he comes as a reformer. Dia datang sebagai seorang reformis. Dia sendiri sangat corrupt. Ya? Dia membuat banyak uang pun ikan di kolam di Bogor dijual.
Itu setelah dia menjabat atau ketika
masih menjabat. Tapi untuk ranah umum, he was a brilliant administrator. He wasn't a very good general, but he was a brilliant administrator. Dan dia meletakkan asas, fondasi dari satu negara modern. Dan satu negara modern tidak kena ada satu jurisdiksi tunggal. There's only one system of law. You didn't have enclaves. Yes. Sebelum ada banyak enclave, you've got Cirebon, you've got Banten, you've got Jogja and Solo, you've got Pangeran Pekik in Surabaya, and you've got lots and lots of different enclaves. And basically what he did is put everything into prefectures. Everything is berdempet-dempet. Ya. Satu sistem untuk administrasi yang dipercepat dan simplified and empowered. You had residents, you had assistant residents. They didn't have to offer siri and wine to the Sultan anymore. They were public servants. They had uniforms. They didn't wear regency dress. They wore uniforms. They were seragam, and those seragam brought with it a certain authority and orza to their position. So Daendels untuk pertama kali bisa mewujudkan, bisa membayangkan salah satu negara modern di mana antara yang publik dan yang private mulai ada jarak. Dipisahkan. Obviously, it's not easy. He's corrupt himself. There's a big corruption trial in 1821 in which the resident, Rijk van Preen of Solo, the translator, J.W. Winter, and all sorts of other acolytes are brought before the court because they engaged in corruption with the Sunan, you know, in terms of getting kickbacks for making appointments. But you have to be consequent. You know, whoever it is, if it's Rijk van Preen was the resident, was a friend of the stadhouder. He was part of dia di dalam paswal dari stadhouder. But it didn't matter because for the Netherlands Indies government, he was less important than the survival of the Netherlands Indies government. There would be no government surviving if people like that were allowed to operate.
Jadi ada kesamaan dengan zamannya Soeharto ya, Presiden Soeharto ya, soal pemerintahan yang tersentralisasi.
Yeah. I mean, Daendels is a sort of modern version of Soeharto, a Dutch Soeharto. Yeah. Centralisasi. He himself is very corrupt, but he puts in place the integuments of a modern state.
Justru kalau, nah ini ya uniknya, ketika zaman Daendels itu untuk urusan-urusan korupsi barangkali belum terlalu mencuat atau apa, tapi justru zamannya Orde Baru Soeharto dengan pemerintahan yang sentralisasi, korupsi merajalela.
Yeah.
Itu gimana jelasannya, Pak Peter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it starts, sudah mulai, kita bicarakan Daendels dulu. Daendels mulai dengan satu sistem kepemerintahan modern. Dia sendiri kurang bersih, tapi dia punya salah satu gagasan dan wawasan bagaimana satu negara modern yang bukan feodal dikelola. Dan semua diberi seragam. Kalau Mas Aryo adalah Bupati X dan temannya adalah Wedono, you would be a colonel and your friend would be a major. Yeah? You'd be dressed in military dress. This is from Daendels, yeah? In order to instill discipline. Yeah? And you would be moving towards a situation where you get a salary, you don't get perks. Yeah? Ada tunjukan, tapi tidak ada istilah lunggu lagi. Yeah? And you can go to peasants and they menjebloskan jalan supaya bisa tidak ada banyak debu atau lain-lain. Yeah? So this starts and it gradually becomes the norm. Obviously, in the late Netherlands Indies state, there is still areas which are corrupt. And the whole system of colonialism, in my view, is corrupt because it's basically privileging foreign capital. But I had a friend in Kediri. I was a member of a Kepatinan group, Sumara, and he was my pamong. And in the Dutch period, he ran the pawn shop, Pegadaian, yeah, in Kediri. And he told me that at the end of the year, he had to give his accounts. And if there was 1 cent missing, he paid for it out of his own pocket. That was in 1939, yeah, with the Dutch. Maybe at the top, ada kelonggaran, I don't know. But in terms of the way in which the Netherlands Indies state operated at the grassroots, lambat laun, the possibility of making stunning sums of money became much less. Yeah. And then Jepang semua porak-poranda. Yeah. And with Suharto, and the problem with Suharto was it, as Benny Mordani told him, it's not you, Bapak, it's your family. He should not, because he was who he was, born dengan satu keluarga yang cerai-berai, yang tidak harmonis, yang tidak mendukung, dikemusuh dan dibon kepada siapapun. He had no family which he could look up to as a tuladan. Yeah? He had people like Pak Daryanto in Wonogiri, who was his guru Kebatinan. He made jamu with him when he was in the Mulo in Wonogiri, before he went to join the Kenil, who were his mentors. But he didn't have mentors within his family who he could respect, look up to. Maybe his mother, yeah? But he was shunted from pillar to post. And that mindset dwelt within him when he made his own family. So it was dynastic. Yeah? He was thinking of, because he'd been sangat menderita waktu kecil, he didn't want this to happen to his children, but he was just completely overindulgent. Yeah? And the children, none of the children, the only one who had any glimmer was Tutut. And the reason she had a glimmer was because she grew up when the family was still poor. She knew poverty.
Sigit?
No. All the children who came later knew Suharto as a divisional army commander of the Diponegoro division or as a Kostrad commander. They were children of his successful years. Tutut knew him, knew the family, had experience of the family when he was still a platoon commander or a Verkries, Sablas, lieutenant colonel. And that meant that she makan garam. She had a sense of what it was like. Yeah? And that was, Suharto essentially destroyed his legacy by, he should have done what the dictator of Pakistan did. The general, what was his name? He used to be in the British Army.
Saya juga lupa namanya siapa.
Anyway, this general came to power as president. He ended
Ali Bhutto, menggantikan Ali Bhutto.
Yeah, Ali Bhutto. He toppled Ali Bhutto. Yeah. And he had a brother who lived in Bradford, who was a GP. Yeah. And he phoned his brother and he said, "Don't you ever think of phoning me because I'm president, memperbaiki nasib di Bradford." Yeah. Lulu gua gua. Yeah. Don't even think of it. And that should have been the case. If Suharto wanted to have a legacy, that should have been the case with Suharto. Yeah. Rumit, but you can do it. If you can gain an independence in 4.5 years, against the might of the Dutch state, the might of the Dutch state up to 1947, supported by America, which gave logistics, tanks, seragam, everything to the Dutch. Yeah? You can make it through this. This is your second struggle for independence. You had one against the Dutch, you now have your second struggle for independence against corruption. And that's a root and branch struggle. It's not about fiddling with the externals. It's about changing the wiring of people's minds.
Ya, kata kuncinya barangkali tadi yang berulang kali disebut oleh Pak Peter, mentalitas.
Yeah, it's a mentality. If Suharto had a different mentality, if he was like, not Benazir Bhutto, but General Zia al-Haq.
Ziaul Haq.
Al-Haq?
Ziaul Haq.
Yeah. And he phoned his brother and said in Bradford and said, I still love you, but don't even think of phoning me because I'm president and asking a favor because I'm not going to give it to you.
Wan, mau nanya atau apa?
Yang dari Pak Harun
sudah semua. Karena gitu aja. Nggak, terakhir barangkali Pak Peter ya. Kalau yang disebut sebagai korupsi struktural ada nggak di Indonesia, Pak?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be structural because you're not paying people proper salaries.
Tapi kan kalau diberi gaji atau upah yang memang lebih dari layak itu, ya seperti tadi kembali ke kasusnya Setia Novanto itu, kan juga tetap aja gitu loh.
Yeah, but
Papa minta saham itu.
Yeah. I mean, there has to be no truck with that behavior, and whoever you are equal before the law. So it's a question of over-mighty subjects. Yeah, subjects who are strong, yeah, because they have connections. You have to create a virtuous cycle, and like Ignatius Jonan did with the railway system. It's very simple. It's not wah, but it works. It's practical. And because people have a sense of pride in the job they do and the cleanliness of the trains they run, the punctuality of the trains they run, the service they provide, and they are paid proper salaries, the 18 juta for the branch manager for Serpong and Chisalk and Rawabuntu, then you have a sense, you know, it's a virtuous cycle you're creating. You're creating professionalization, you're creating a sense of pride in that professionalization, and you're rewarding that professionalization with a proper salary.
Proper salary. Okay.
And you say you've got to live on that. It's a bit like what Sri Mulyani did with the finance ministry. Yeah? I'm not promising you the moon, but with the salaries which I've quadrupled, you should be able to live. I want to create what Jonan did within the system of the railways, here in the Kementerian Finance. You're not here to membabalkan negara. You could easily do that. You know, this guy with the son with the Rubicon, remember the South Jakarta?
Rubicon siapa namanya?
Risi.
Enggak, Rubicon itu siapa?
Risi Sihatu.
Bukan. Bukan. Rubicon siapa nama bapaknya?
Yeah, he was a sort of a regional tax inspector in South Jakarta, somewhere like, I don't know, sort of Cinere or, yeah. And he had all these deals done with the sort of big fish, and his son then was in this casus in which he destroyed the life of a young Muhammadiyah student who were merebutkan girlfriend.
Untung itu nggak di blow up ke soal Sarah itu, Pak Peter. Iya kan itu toko Muhammadiyah. Iya. Yang satu ini apa?
Yeah.
Katolik gitu kan.
That's right.
Kalau dibenturkan itu lebih dahsyat itu.
Yeah. I remember I worked for the Ministry of Health for 3 years. Pretty dire experience. But we had a technician working for, I set up a school in Cilandak called the JSPO, Jakarta School of Prosthetics and Orthotics. And we had a technician or a pegawai who used to work for the KPK as a interrogator. And he told me one day, if the kasus Bank Sentry betul-betul dibobolkan, this country would have collapsed.
Falling down.
Yep. Because so many deals were done to save lots and lots of different people. Yeah. The Bank of Indonesia, under Sri Mulyani at the time, or whoever it was, they bailed out everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a very different case of Willem Sriwijaya in 1995, when the Bank Suma went bankrupt. And he sold 75% of his shares in PT Astra in order